Now we're going to start exploding sleeves. It's very easy for me to show you how to make these changes on a sleeve, and you'll quickly see the concept. Then you can use these same concepts for other garment style changes. With just one sleeve pattern, you can get hundreds of different versions. Here are 3 different puffed sleeves. This one is gathered at the bottom. If it is a long sleeve, they call it a bishop's sleeve. This one is gathered at the top. You've seen this sleeve on blouses and jackets, and it too can be long or short. And this is the classical puffed sleeve, gathered at the top and the bottom. All 3 of these sleeves started with the same pattern and the same cut lines. First, draw a line to shorten the sleeve. Then draw 3 vertical lines, one through the shoulder point and the other 2 through each notch. Make all of these lines parallel to the grain line. Add 4 more lines between these lines to make 7 equally spaced parallel lines like this. These markings are the same for all 3 puffed sleeve styles, but the way you cut them is different. For the bottom gather, cut along the horizontal line, then cut each line up from the lower edge to the sleeve cap seam line, but not through the seam allowance. Whatever sleeve modification you're making, you always use the same clipping and taping technique described here. Clip from the cutting line to the seam line to form a small paper hinge. Place the pattern over a second piece of pattern paper. Spread each section almost as much as its width and tape the original pattern pieces in place on the new paper. To provide enough fabric to puff, you need to extend the length of the sleeve at the lower edge, curving from the underarm seam down to the center of the sleeve and back up to the other side as shown here. You can experiment with how much to add at the curve, but about 2 inches at the widest should be adequate. To construct the sleeve, gather along the bottom edge, bind it or add a cuff, and set the sleeve as normal for this result. For the top gather, you just reverse the last sleeve process. As you can see, the area you want to gather gets spread. For this sleeve, you spread the top so you have to cut from the top down. Leave a seam allowance at the hem and don't cut through it. You can face or hem the edge. Spread the pattern on a second piece of paper as before, and this time extend the top. A couple of inches are usually enough, but you can always cut back if you've left too much fabric. You can also test your pattern in muslin fabric to be sure. For the classic puffed sleeve, cut all the way through the sleeve pieces. Spread them on the second paper equally. Extend the fabric on both the top and bottom. Add seam allowances and gather both edges. For all of these puffed sleeves, gather the top to fit the armhole and align the notches and shoulder point to set the sleeve. Here is a very sophisticated and unusual cowl sleeve. On your pattern, draw a line across the sleeve at the elbow. Drop a perpendicular line from the shoulder point to the elbow line. On the vertical line, mark a point even with the notches and draw a diagonal line from it, 1/3 of the distance between the shoulder point and the notches on each side. Cut through the shoulder point line down to the elbow line. Cut the elbow line, leaving a hinge at the seam lines, and cut the wedges, leaving a hinge at the seam line. Spread the sections as shown and tape to a second piece of paper. Draw a horizontal line connecting the wedges and a parallel line above that about 2 inches wide. Draw a new grain line 45 degrees to the original grain line and cut the sleeve on the bias. To construct this sleeve, turn the top edge along the line to the wrong side and press. Sew the underarm seam and set the sleeve cap bringing the folded edges to meet at the shoulder point. In paper, the cowl doesn't drape the same way it does in fabric. You can see why I call that exploding sleeves. We just cut them apart and spread them all over the place to make a whole new version. This last sleeve is different. It kind of turns itself inside out. This is a tulip sleeve. Here it's made with a standard sleeve pattern, and in this version the pattern was puffed on the top edge. The pattern work for this is very easy. This time you draw the lines, but you don't cut them. You trace them. Determine how long you want the sleeve. This is a short sleeve technique. Draw a curved line from the underarm seam at the hemline. Across the shoulder point, taking up about 2/3 of the sleeve cap. Add a seam allowance to this line. Repeat on the opposite side of the sleeve. Trace each of these sections as separate pieces and join them on the underarm seam line, which now becomes the new grain line. This sleeve needs to be lined to finish the edge. Line it with a lightweight fabric on the bottom edge. Turn to the right side and press. Then align the shoulder points. The sleeve cap will overlap and you can set the sleeve. I hope that inspires you to get creative with your sleeves and be courageous with exploring pattern manipulation. It's all about changing the shapes of things.